Today, we're taking a look at NVIDIA's extremely popular RTX 70 series from its introduction with the RTX 2070 in late 2018, right up to this year's release, the RTX 5070. And this will give us a good look at what NVIDIA has offered each generation and help us rank the 5070 against its predecessors. But before we do that, today's sponsor spot is brought to you by WOLFBOX and their MegaFlow handheld turbofans. The MegaFlow 100 features a 150,000 RPM brushless motor that enables a wind speed of 45 meters per second and offers up to 100 minutes of runtime. This makes it ideal for heavy-duty tasks like cleaning your PC, while still being capable of easier jobs with variable speed control. There's also the MegaFlow 50, a more budget-friendly option that still packs impressive power with a 110,000 RPM motor, 3 speed settings, and up to 240 minutes of runtime. Both models come with a handful of attachments and are charged via USB Type-C for maximum convenience. So for more information, please check the link in the video description. Okay, so of course we have already reviewed the RTX 5070, and I have to say, upon release, I found it pretty underwhelming. The biggest issue was the fact that it kept the same 12GB VRAM capacity as the RTX 4070, which is a problem as games continue to use more VRAM, as do features like ray tracing and upscaling. So at $550 US, we really felt 16GB should be the minimum spec. All of that said, is the RTX 5070 a better release than the RTX 4070? How does it stack up and compare to what the RTX 3070 offered in 2020? And is it better than what we got from the 2070 all the way back in 2018? Well, to find out, we're testing all of them head-to-head at 1080p, 1440p and 4K, using 2 different quality presets per game to get a good idea of where things stand. So, let's get into the results. Starting with the Call of Duty Black Ops 6 basic preset results, we see that at 1080p, the old RTX 2070 was good for 109 FPS on average, while the 3070 averaged 161 FPS, and that's a massive 48% performance improvement, which explains why the 30 series was just so exciting when it first released. That said though, the 4070 was 41% faster than the 3070, while the latest 5070 is just 3% faster in this example, so I'm not really sure what's going on in this game. Then as we increase the resolution, some of the margins grow a bit. For example, the 3070 is now a massive 57% faster than the 2070. That said though, the 4070's margin over the 3070 has come down to 34%, while the newer 5070 is now 7% faster when comparing the average frame rate, though it was 23% faster when looking at the 1% lows, so that's something. Now, if we increase the visual quality settings with the Extreme preset, the RTX 2070 is limited to just 44 FPS on average at 1080p, making the RTX 3070 a massive 84% faster with 81 FPS. Now, the RTX 4070 is another 40% faster, averaging 113 FPS, while the 5070 is again barely any faster than its predecessor with 119 FPS. We're seeing similar performance trends at 1440p and 4K. The 3070 is around twice as fast as the 2070, while the 4070 is a little over 30% faster than the 3070. And then we have the 4070 and 5070. They're much the same, so let's move on to another game. Next up, we have Cyberpunk 2077 Phantom Liberty, and we'll start with the low-quality preset data. At 1080p, the 3070 was 60% faster than the 2070, rendering 141 FPS opposed to just 88 FPS. Then, from the 3070 to the 4070, we saw a further 35% performance increase, up to 191 FPS, and then just a 10% increase from the 4070 to the 5070. It's a similar story at 1440p. The 3070 was 62% faster than the 2070, the 4070 33% faster than the 3070, and then the 5070 just 13% faster than the 4070. Moving on to the high preset data, we find that the RTX 2070 is now able to render 67 FPS at 1080p, making the next generation 30 series model 54% faster, while the 4070 was another 23% faster. We're also seeing a decent performance gain from the RTX 5070 under these conditions, as here it is 22% faster than the 4070. Not a massive margin, but certainly the best margin we've seen from the 5070 so far. And that margin also grew slightly at 1440p to 26%, and then we see a far more impressive 45% margin at 4K. Testing Horizon Zero Dawn Remastered with the medium preset, we see that the RTX 2070 is good for 88 FPS at 1080p, and then just 65 FPS at 1440p. At both resolutions, the 3070 was just shy of 60% faster, so a massive uplift there for the 30 series GPU. Then when we go from the 3070 to the 4070, we're looking at an almost 30% uplift, but from the 4070 to the 5070, just a 10 to 15% performance boost. Switching to the very high preset leads to some odd-looking results, but keep in mind this quality preset, even at 1080p, requires more than 8GB of VRAM. As a result, the 2070 and 3070, both of which have 8GB of VRAM, struggle with frame time performance when using the very high quality preset. Now, the average frame rates don't look too bad, but the 1% lows are terrible. So the fact that the 3070 is almost 40% faster when comparing the average frame rate, it doesn't really matter. So the only usable models here when using these settings would be the RTX 4070 and 5070, both of which delivered similar 1% lows, with the 5070 around 10 to 13% faster when comparing the average frame rate. Moving on to the Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 data, and again we'll start with the lower quality preset, this time being medium. Here the 2070 averaged 87 FPS at 1080p, making the 3070 53% faster or 55% faster at 1440p. Then from the 3070 to the 4070, we see a 25% increase or 22% at 1440p. Now, quite unexpectedly, the RTX 5070 was much faster than the 4070 in this title, delivering 31% greater performance at all three tested resolutions. When switching to the Ultra preset, we see that the RTX 2070 limits performance to just 52 FPS at 1080p, making the 3070 considerably faster with 80 FPS, and that's a 54% improvement. Then from the 3070 to the 4070, we are only seeing a 25% increase, and then 28% from the 4070 to the 5070, and very similar margins are also seen at 1440p. Now, a game that all four GPUs should tackle with ease is Rainbow Six Siege, and that is indeed the case, at least when using the medium preset at a 100% render scale, as even the RTX 2070 was good for an average of 189 FPS at 1080p and 125 FPS at 1440p. And this meant that the RTX 3070 was around 49 to 53% faster depending on the resolution, while the 4070 offered an additional 27 to 32% performance uplift. Then we have the 5070, which was good for 22 to 26% more performance when compared to the 4070, of course. Increasing the quality preset to Ultra Plus heavily reduces performance, and now the RTX 2070 is only able to render 117 FPS at 1080p and 74 FPS at 1440p, making the RTX 3070 just over 50% faster. Then from the RTX 3070 to the 4070, we're looking at just over a 30% improvement, and from the 4070 to the 5070, just a 20% improvement. The second last game tested is Space Marine 2, and when using the medium settings, the RTX 2070 rendered 65 FPS at 1080p and a mere 47 FPS at 1440p. As a result, the RTX 3070 was considerably faster, delivering a 66% performance boost at 1080p and 70% at 1440p. The jump from the 3070 to the 4070 was far less substantial, just a 26 to 27% increase at 1080p and 1440p. Now, the 4070 and 5070 matchup is a bit of an odd one. At 1080p, we are looking at CPU-limited data, though the 4070 does manage to render just a few extra frames, making it slightly faster than the 5070 here. Then at 1440p, the 1% lows do end up being much the same, but the 5070 is now 25% faster when comparing the average frame rate, and it ends up being 29% faster at 4K with 71 FPS on average. The 1080p data, even with the Ultra preset, is still quite heavily CPU limited, so let's focus on the 1440p results. Here the RTX 2070 averaged just 39 FPS, making the 3070 significantly faster, rendering 66 FPS, that's an almost 70% performance jump. Then from the 3070 to the 4070, we're looking at a more mild 24% increase, and then 28% from the 4070 to the 5070. Finally, we have Shadow of the Tomb Raider, an older game to showcase the performance of these GPUs. The RTX 2070 felt a lot more comfortable here, rendering 119 FPS at 1080p and 86 FPS at 1440p, making the 3070 exactly 57% faster at both resolutions. Then we have the 4070 offering 24 to 28% more performance than the 3070, while the 5070 was 26% faster than the 4070. Finally, we have the highest quality preset, and here the 2070 was good for 102 FPS on average at 1080p and 72 FPS at 1440p. And this meant that the 3070 was around 55% faster, rendering on average 158 FPS at 1080p and 113 FPS at 1440p, and we also saw 62 FPS at 4K. And then we have the 4070, which was 32% faster than the 3070 at 1080p, 27% faster at 1440p, and 24% faster at 4K. Finally, the RTX 5070. It delivered around 25% more performance than the 4070, so a decent uplift there, though nothing to get too excited about, especially if you already owned an RTX 4070. Okay, so here's the 7-game average data calculated using the GeoMean. And we'll start by looking at the low to medium quality settings. The RTX 3070 was on average 55% faster than the 2070 at 1080p, 59% faster at 1440p, and 62% faster at 4K. So needless to say, the RTX 3070 was a massive upgrade from the RTX 2070, even if it did still only have 8GB of VRAM. Then from the 3070 to the 4070, we found a 31% performance improvement at 1080p, 27% at 1440p, and 24% at 4K. Then we have the RTX 5070, which offered a mere 14% improvement at 1080p, though it was 20% faster at 1440p and 22% faster at 4K, for an average of 95 FPS. So pretty solid performance overall using the dialed down quality settings. Now, when using the high to ultra presets, we see the RTX 3070 is anywhere from 57 to 68% faster than the 2070, depending on the resolution used. The 4070, on the other hand, was 33% faster than the 3070 at 1080p, 30% faster at 1440p, and 27% faster at 4K. As for the RTX 5070, it was 16% faster than the 4070 at 1080p, 20% faster at 1440p, and 23% faster at 4K. So in terms of value, this is how the 4 generations compare, based on their MSRP, and I will adjust for inflation in a moment. But ignoring that very real factor, this is how they would compare if they were all released at the same time. Focusing on the 1440p data, the 3070 reduced the cost per frame by 40% when compared to the 2070, so a big value improvement there. The 4070, on the other hand, reduced the cost per frame by a mere 8%, so while it was nice to get that extra VRAM capacity, the price increase did really hurt its value. And therefore, comparatively, the RTX 5070 actually looks pretty good, reducing the cost per frame by 24%. Now, when we adjust for inflation, we find that the 3070 improved the cost per frame from the 2070 by 43%. However, the 4070 now stacks up much better relative to the 3070, reducing the cost per frame by 22%, while the 5070 is now 28% better value than the 4070. So the RTX 3070 still offered by far the biggest generational uplift of the RTX generation, but the 4070 and 5070 do look a bit better when adjusting for inflation. So depending on how you look at it, the RTX 5070 can either be an underwhelming release or one of the better RTX 70 series products. It is cheaper than the RTX 4070, but whereas the 4070 was on average 30% faster than the 3070, the 5070 is just 20% faster than the 4070. But when we adjust for inflation, the 5070 is better value when compared to what the 4070 had to offer. It's a 28% improvement in terms of cost per frame, opposed to 22% for the 4070, of course, over its predecessor. The big issue for the RTX 5070 has always been that 12GB VRAM capacity, and I suspect it will age about as well as the 3070 did. Just a few years after release, the RTX 3070 was starting to struggle to take advantage of those RTX features. Ray tracing really did start to consume a lot more VRAM, and even upscaling could be problematic. The 5070 looks to be following a similar path in my opinion. There are already examples where it runs out of VRAM, or is very near the limits. So give it a few more years and you're likely to run into much more trouble. Not something you want to deal with when spending at least $550 US on a graphics card. So had the RTX 5070 been upgraded with 16GB of VRAM like the 5070 Ti, then it would have been a significantly better product, and one that we would be much more comfortable recommending and would probably be excited to recommend it. Of course, as it stands right now, for the vast majority of games and quality settings, 12GB of VRAM is fine, and the RTX 5070 will work perfectly well. Rather, the concern is more about this being a multi-year investment. But at this point, the GeForce 70 series has felt compromised or overpriced more than it should be for a long time now, and really this did all start with the introduction of the RTX 2070 series. The RTX 2070 was a perfectly fine product, performance was excellent, delivering around 25 to 30% better performance than the GTX 1070 at 1440p, along with new features such as hardware ray tracing and DLSS upscaling, though neither of them were good for quite some time. That's worth noting. RTX support was virtually non-existent for the first few years, and the original implementation of DLSS was pure garbage. DLSS really didn't get good until DLSS 2.0. So those two factors alone made the RTX 2070's $500 US asking price a tall order, given that the GTX 1070 cost just $380 US and packed the same 8GB of VRAM. Essentially, you were faced with having to spend a little over 30% more for a little less than 30% more performance. And that's pretty underwhelming stuff, and therefore the obvious issue with the RTX 2070 was the price. The RTX 3070 managed to offer a lot more at the same $500 US price point. As we just saw, it was 60 to 70% faster on average, depending on the quality settings, and DLSS was much better by the time it was released. And there were also a couple of truly transformative ray tracing titles that we could point to. It's not a lot, but it's certainly better than none. The problem here was again VRAM. Just 8GB once again, so that was the compromise with the RTX 3070, and it did prove to be problematic within the lifespan of that product. The RTX 4070 did address the VRAM issue. 12GB proved to be enough for that model, perhaps just enough, but enough all the same. The problem, rather, as we just saw, again was the price. And I guess the performance uplift you got for that price. $600 US was a new high for a 70 class GeForce GPU, and offering just a 30% performance boost while jacking the price up by 20%, it wasn't exactly exciting stuff. Now we have the RTX 5070. The MSRP has been reduced by 8% down to $550 US, and for the most part they have been available at the MSRP. It is only offering 20% more performance over the previous model, but again, it is cheaper, which is why the value equation comes out in its favor. The compromise, once again, is the 12GB of VRAM. It's certainly not an 8GB 5060 Ti, so it's not that bad, but as I've already said, I am concerned as to how well it will age. As for whether or not you should buy an RTX 5070, it will depend entirely on pricing in your region, and of course, what else is available. At the time of making this video, you can buy an RTX 5070 for as little as $500 US over on Newegg. It's an MSI Ventus model, though everything else is $550 or more. Newegg has a single RX 9070 at $550 with numerous models at $570 US. So you're looking at most paying a 10% premium for the Radeon GPU, with the majority of examples under a 5% premium. For context, in our recent 23-game benchmark comparing these two GPUs, we found that on average the RX 9070 was 13% faster when comparing the performance at 1440p, whether that be native or upscaled performance. So in terms of cost per frame, they end up being about the same, each with their own pros and cons. The RX 9070 has 16GB of VRAM, which again we consider to be the minimum now, at least when spending over $400 US on a GPU. But the 5070 has slightly superior upscaling quality and game support when comparing DLSS 4 versus FSR 4. And when those latest upscaling techniques aren't available, it's an easy win for the GeForce GPU, as DLSS 2 and DLSS 3 are far superior to FSR 4 and FSR 3. Especially at resolutions you're most likely to use these products at, so 1440p or lower. The RTX 5070 is also faster for heavy ray tracing games, especially those that use path tracing, and this was highlighted in our day one review. Though it does have to be said that the RTX 5070 isn't exactly amazing in those heavy RT titles. And once again, that 12GB VRAM capacity is becoming a bit of a problem there. So I wouldn't say that this is a huge strength of the 5070. And at the end of the day, the RTX 5070 and RX 9070 are very evenly matched. So again, it will come down to pricing and availability in your region. So of course, make sure you check out pricing. But anyway, that is a look at the RTX 5070 and all the models that came before it in the RTX range that were 70 series cards. Anyway, like I said, that's the end of the video. I'm done. If you enjoyed it, you can start working by hitting that like button. That'd be greatly appreciated. You can also subscribe for more content. I'll probably make a similar video for the last few generations of Radeon, sort of mid-range, mid to high-end range, whatever you call them. Their naming's all messed up, so Radeon makes this a little bit difficult. Anyway, a Radeon version is what I'm trying to say. We'll do. We also have the join button on Patreon. Clicking on either one of those will give you access to our exclusive Discord server, monthly live streams, Q&A stuff, and behind-the-scenes content. So check that out if you're interested. If not, that is perfectly fine. And I would like to thank you for watching this video. I'm your host, Steve. See you again next time.